Hey, yeah, so my name's Jennings. This is our talk, Developers Are Different. What UX professionals need to know about developer experience. So like I said, my name's Jennings, and I moved to Austin about 4 years ago from New York City. And up in New York, I spent a lot of time at hackathons. If you all are familiar, hackathons are 24-hour coding competitions where developers build an app basically overnight, and it's like a contest, so at the end somebody wins. But what you guys would be concerned about is this is actually where developer products are tested, so often people will come to get hands-on research with how developers are using their product. And that kind of starts our story here. So in that time, I built this platform called Hacker League, and it was basically an event management system for hackathons. So you would go on there and find out where the next hackathon was, and people who participated could upload what they made. That later sold to Intel as a part of Mashery, and I went on to join this company called PubNub. And PubNub is a completely developer product, so they only build products for developers. And while I was there, I built a couple of my own products. I built a SDK for real-time dashboards, so it allows developers to build real-time charts and maps. And then I also built a SDK for chat, so it allows developers to build chat applications. In that time, I was effectively acting as a developer experience, engineer, researcher, sort of taking that responsibility at the startup. But this field is so new that there really hasn't been a term to describe this work so far. So I was actually a developer evangelist or developer relations, but those terms have come to describe anybody who's effectively interacting with developers like face-to-face. Now I run a company called Haxor, and it's kind of taking that hackathon idea, compressing it, and merging it with user research. So simplifying it, it's user experience research for developer experience. So it's, there's a lab here in Visa. It's effectively those same processes, but used for developers. And this talk is really about how developer experience can learn from user experience, as well as what are the differences between the two. Some of the work I've done is with TimeHop, and like he mentioned, MLH, Major League Hacking, they run a lot of hackathons, and Sterling is a background check API. These are the clients I've had so far. The company's about a year old now. And so to back up a little bit, what is developer experience? So developer experience, hereby known as DX, is the equivalent to user experience when the user of the software or system is a developer. So again, it's effectively the same thing, but we have this type of user that's so different, we're saying it needs to be a different field. So you might say that's crazy, right? Because you have personas, right? Like, let's just define a persona for a developer. This is nuts. We have all these processes. Why is this a field? So I'm going to here try to convince you that it deserves to be its own thing. Another definition here, developer experience describes the experience developers have when they use your product, be it client libraries, SDKs, frameworks, open source code, tools, API, technology, or service. So again, it's a similar definition, but when we start to dig into it, this is where we start diverging from user experience, right? These are creator tools, they're not really consumer tools. And for the rest of this talk, I'm going to refer to most of these things as just APIs, because APIs drive most of these products, and it'll just make things simpler. I don't have to list all the different variations. So what is an API? This is a fun little example. Imagine there's a restaurant or a coffee shop, and you have a barista, and then you have the kitchen, and you have a customer. Well, the customer comes in and orders a coffee, and the barista goes and makes the coffee from the kitchen. The barista effectively acts as an API. It is the way that the customer is able to get what it wants, but it's not, the customer doesn't get access to the kitchen, right? Like, the customer doesn't just get to walk in and get everything. So if you imagine that you're Facebook and you want to have an API, it'd be crazy to expose all of the data to every developer, right? So what you do is you create an API, and the API says you can access your friends, but you can't access everybody's friends, things like that. So an API is basically the interface in which a developer is able to access data from another service. A service has, say your Visa, you have credit card transactions, the ability to process credit cards. Visa actually has an API that allows you to turn a card on or off at any moment. So with that API, I'd be able to tell, I'm the developer, I can tell Visa, I want to turn off my card, and then Visa turns it off. All right, so moving on. Again, application programming interface, right? So drawing these relations, the common word here is interface between, right, user interface and what we're talking about now, developer experience. Interface means, right, connecting two things together, and if we look at the definition here, computing an interface is shared boundary across which two or more separate components of a computer system exchange information. But the exchange can be between software, computer hardware, peripheral devices, humans, or a combination. What we're mostly dealing with in user experience is human-computer interaction, right? It's how is this human using this computer and how are they conducting themselves, right? I made this up here, but it's basically, in developer experience, we're looking at how is a human programming the computer that interacts with another computer. So we're basically looking at another step away. You have somebody, right, a real live person with emotions and feelings is talking to the computer and trying to make that computer talk to this other computer. And it adds this whole other dimension, right? There's problems that can exist between their own programming, and there's problems that can exist between these two computers talking. And I'll dive into that a little bit more. Technically, literally looking at this, a developer is going to be building an application that talks with the API. So if I'm building this Visa application, right, I'm the developer, I'm building my app, and then that app is going to talk to the Visa API. And then more practically here, this is actually backwards compared to how those other charts were, but you have, again, here, Visa, with all their APIs, their data, software, services, products, they expose that information via an API, developer creates the app, and then that app is then exposed as a software application, which an end user uses. And this is how I divide that up, right? So again, traditionally, we're looking at how the end user uses a software application. Developer experience is about looking at how this developer is using the API and creating that software application. They both overlap. Like, the developer is going to be building some kind of UI probably when they build an app, but it's a totally different field. And you might be wondering, okay, this is crazy, like there are far more people here, right? There are like so many more users of applications than there are developers building APIs. But it gets a little bit more interesting. So, just for terminology's sake, or definition, we have combination of user and interface, right? UI. What is the interface that a user uses? UI. What's a study? UX. Okay, what's the interface a developer uses? API. And what's that study? DX. So why does this matter? Let's go back to 2002. In 2002, Jeff Bezos, he's the CEO of Amazon. You don't have to read all, just read 1 and 6, basically. He said, all teams will henceforth expose their data and functionality through service interfaces. We skip to 6, anyone who doesn't do this will be fired. So what he's saying basically is everything at Amazon has to have an API internally. That's what that led to, right? It led to AWS. This is accounting for half of their profit now. This is like as big as their sales. And it's super early too. 2002 is crazy, because if we look at this chart, this is the growth in web APIs since 2005. So if you look around 2006 here, it's like nothing, right? We go to 2010, I got in the game over here. There's about 5 or 6 times as many APIs out there now. This is a huge market. If y'all are familiar maybe with these two companies, might be bad mojo to bring Stripe into the Visa office, but So Stripe is crazy popular, and Twilio just IPO'd in 2016. These are the market leaders in developer experience. They're huge APIs. They are definitely, in any developer relations conference, these guys show up almost every talk. There's happy Twilio people at the NYSE. And this is why this matters. So if you take, remember that section I had highlighted in the middle, thousands of developers, they build millions of apps and then billions of users, right? So by exposing that information, you're able to build apps, and those apps scale out to all these other users. So rather than having Visa produce the app, well, Visa can open that up and have as many people as they can hire or want to develop apps, and that's scaling their business out. It's all about scale. So how that happens, right? You got to get this part first before you can have this huge impact, and that's why this matters here. That's why we're focused on making these developers happy, right? Because they're going to go and decide which checkout system they're going to use. What credit card company are they going to use? And that's what matters. Because then you get to scale to the end user. So there's a lot of money to be made in making developers happy and getting them on board. Even if the market's not as big as users, right? Okay, so how do we do that? What do developers value? All right, so the following charts, a lot of these graphics, again, to give you an idea, developer experience is very new. A lot of these graphics are just like taking off blog posts and things like that. We don't have a single book about developer experience. There's nothing. Anyway, but I still, I believe these are pretty powerful. This makes a lot of sense to me too, right? Like, okay, developers, what do they value? They value function. It's got to work first, right? Stability, then it's got to be easy, then it's got to be clear. I think it's pretty straightforward. Basically, you're saying that it's got to work first, it's got to be reliable, then it's got to be easy to use and clear. But when you look at what people are actually doing, this is what we're getting most of the time. So these companies that are producing APIs, they're getting to the function and stable part, and people are just ignoring the stability and the clarity. We're not even getting there. A lot of times we'll just get the API, they dump it out, and they say they're engineers, they'll figure it out, or they're our partner, and they have to use it. So, all right, this is something, this is a conceptual framework. What do developers care about? Again, fun points. This is DEX, but we're calling it DX. This is, I forget where it's from, but we haven't even decided on what we're going to abbreviate this damn thing to. DX is probably the most popular, but it shows up as DevX and everything. Anyway, so we can basically break this down into how do developers see the value of their contribution? How do they feel about their work? And what do they perceive the development infrastructure to be like? So if you look at that, it's like, how is it going to be to develop this product? How is my product going to affect other people? And how is what I'm doing important, right? And you're thinking about that's what developers are caring about as they're building. But again, we're mostly only getting this section because this is the technical section that's about implementation, right? It's about how it works, the technical part. We're missing this sort of existential areas about how is this affecting other people and how is it affecting myself, how do I feel about it? And that's where a lot of the research is focused on. Because we have automated testing, we have analytics, we have all this stuff that can handle the technical stuff. But this is where the area where there's really room to be improved. That's why I'm excited to be here too, because I know UX people love this part. Well, they can represent us there. Anyway, so going forward, okay, developers are different. Why are they a different cohort? Why are they different? Well, this magic word already on stage once is empathy. And so I have a question for the audience, which is how many people have ever seen somebody code? Okay, that's a good amount. I'm happy about that. A lot of people have never seen anybody code before, right? They've seen The Matrix and they've seen TV shows. Here I have the results of a test. It's 1 hour of coding in 2 minutes. I'm going to play it for you and then I'll try to narrate what he's doing. There we go. Is it playing? Yeah. All right, so this is a user experience research video. He's looking at the documentation and reading, trying to authenticate, popping stuff in terminal, taking notes, stuff like that. And now he's in a tool called Postman. Postman's like a tester, like an API tester kind of thing. It's not quite coding yet, it's just testing. And it's a way to understand the API and sort of interact with it before you code, because coding has a lot more work associated with getting results. Again, still documentation and coding. This is about halfway through. So if you look at this 30 minutes of just understanding, no coding, right? Okay, now he's going into a developer portal. And he's looking at the results in the developer portal and saying, oh, did my API calls do something that I understand? You know, how do I interact with this stuff? He like kind of verifies it works, and then he's going to start coding pretty soon. So he's looking for tools now, looking for SDKs. What can I use to make this easier? And it's starting up a project in the terminal. And now he started coding, right? That's probably 3/4 of the way in. And he's just making these same API calls he was making in Postman, but in his coding environment. I think that's about it, yeah. So it doesn't look like the Matrix, right? It looks like someone hungry for information. So that's what I wrote here. The person's basically hunting for information, they're copying and pasting, and they're application switching. So again, why are developers different? Well, if we're looking at UX and we're looking at DX, they're going to be using a variety of applications, right? We saw that application switching. We saw that there's maybe like 6 or 7 different applications they're using. And it seemed like they were pretty familiar, so I'll skip through this next part pretty quick. I'm going to go through what some of those applications are. This one is an IDE. It's like a fancy text editor. It's a big, complicated, multi-file editor text editor. This is a terminal. It's like a chatbot for your computer. You get to run commands in it. This is Git. It's where people go upload their code and they talk about their code. This is a browser extension. There's actually a little funny part in that video where the guy is trying to log in and he's in the wrong portal. And he can't, the portal's not showing him why, so he opens an extension to find out what the request said. He's like trying to hack the system, basically. This is a sandbox. This is called Postman. This is what he used for about half of the video. Then we have things like community forums, like Stack Overflow or blog posts. And then finally we have the products that these creators create, right? Like the developer portal or documentation. Now, developers will use basically any resource they can to accomplish their task. They don't care about what you produced or what your documentation says or whatever. They'll just gonna brute force this thing. They're gonna try to get through and accomplish their goals. So even if you didn't create it, they're gonna go use it. I don't know how many times I can drive that forward. They're basically not isolated to what the company makes. The reason I'm getting in on this is because this is what people think their developer experience is like. And so they say, we're gonna, we need to improve our developer experience. And they spend a year doing their developer portal. Because they think that this is the developer, this is their son, and the developer portal is what they care about, and the console, and the whatever. And then Postman's over here, and these other apps are over here, right? But in reality, it looks like this. Like, they could care less about your portal. They care about their application, the framework, and Postman. He's in there for half an hour, right? This is what they care about, and this is just all, they might have 10 developer portals because they're using 10 APIs. And meanwhile, you're spending a year, like, revamping your portal, and they're just trying to copy and paste the keys. The cool thing about this, though, is they'll actually help you create your product. So developers, are really active and vocal, and there's a lot of mediums for them to contribute and stuff. So they'll actually create their own content, right? If you look on NPM, this is a package manager, so you can go and find other code people wrote. There's 500 packages for Stripe. Stripe didn't make 500 packages, right? If I search for Stripe and Vue, Vue's like a popular framework right now. Stripe didn't make any of these. They didn't make any of these. They don't own these links. So what do, right? You basically have to go there and interact with the developers where they're going. There's a huge problem with this, which is like paywalls, right? You're not in control. So what if someone publishes something on Medium and there's a paywall? That sucks. You got to go to where they are. You got to get that article off Medium and put it on your own blog. The community is a really you have to take a holistic view. It's a really dispersed thing, and it's not about your portal and the centralized thing where you are. You have to go to where they are because they're using this huge environment. Speaking of that, every developer has their own unique and custom environment. So they're not running your app on the iPhone, 10 versus 11. They're running it on a complete own system that has their own freaking conflicts with whatever you're doing. They have their own version of Node. They have their own preferred language. They have their own system requirements. And guess what? They also love their tools too, so they're not going to move from that. Every machine is unique, and it's actually a big problem for developers themselves too. So there's a lot of work to try to standardize environments, because this is just a problem for everyone, that everyone has a different environment. And so we have this thing called Docker, which it's pretty new. It's kind of getting adoption, but this is a sort of easy way to standardize environments and get things running. Like I mentioned too, developers have a variety of languages. And when I worked at PubNub, we had 70 languages. We supported like 10, right? Because how many resources do we have? So the poor person is gonna use like Flash, you know what I mean? They're not getting any support, the thing's outdated. We don't have the resources to contribute to all these products, but these people need to have a good experience. Because you don't know what guy is gonna use Flash, right? You don't know if their Amazon is doing something crazy, right? So I want to make the case that it's a different, it's a different environment. We don't make 70 iPhone apps and test them. But we need to actually provide a pretty good experience to every one of these. And then back on the sort of the custom environment, the preferences, all the other crazy things can go wrong. I did a test one time where 5 out of 5 developers cannot sign up for an account. This is a public company, open registration, you just go sign up, and 5 out of 5 developers can sign up. No one in the company knew that this was happening. Does anyone have a guess why that happened? No? Okay. The answer is because all 5 developers had AdBlock installed. No one in the company had tested that, right? But the AdBlock code tried to trigger a marketing integration, and it failed, and then you couldn't sign up. Okay, so how do we get developers what they want if they're just so crazy, it's like it doesn't look anything like UX? What do we do, right? Well, the amazing thing is that we have everything that user experience has contributed, right, to base off of. So just because it's a little different doesn't mean we're too far away to use these models. If we look at this, this is a lot to go over right now. I'm just going to kind of summarize it. But if we look at the end goal, it's kind of what I'm saying earlier, where user perspective, right, is about using the product, and then in the developer perspective, it's about creating the product. And then if we dive into like, which one do I like? So I like avoid usage defects and increase robustness. So if we're looking at how do we get people to do what we want without making mistakes, right? In the user perspective, we're going to try to design the thing better, right? We're going to try to guide them along better. It's the same in developer perspective, but what we're actually doing is prescribing process models. So we're saying first you do this, then you do that. It's actually a lot more instructional. But they're sort of the same idea, right? We're basically trying to guide the user in both cases, but in one case, we're doing it through design. In the other case, we're going to do it through design, but like instruction. And if you look back at that 2 minutes of video, he's reading a lot of information which should be prescribing him the correct process to follow, right? And that's often where we lose people, is we're not actually saying, this is how you should do this. UX has customer journeys, right? This is just a pretty simple one. I know that they vary a lot, but we can use the same thing for developers, right? So developers discover, evaluate, get started, develop, celebrate, maintain. And that's sort of what this field needs, right? We're using these frameworks that UX has already produced and applying them to this developer experience. In a way, it's a lot like customer experience. I'd be really curious to learn what you guys think about that. Customer experience is effectively saying that, okay, you have UX and you have this app. Say the app delivers groceries to your door. Well, what's it like when that person needs to return the groceries that they delivered to the door, right? And what is the user experience of that experience, right? Do they go through the app? Who do they interact with? What's the guy wearing when he goes to the door? And that's effectively how developer experience is. It's not encapsulated into this little app. And what I like about customer experience as a analogy is you basically have touch points. And these aren't limited to like a single application or like a single screen, right? And so you have marketing, ads, email, direct mail as pre-purchase, and then we have, the salesperson, the events and stuff during purchase, post-purchase. newsletters, etc. But as we look at developers, we can kind of do the same thing, right? So pre-purchase, they're going to look at the open source project, blogs, tutorials, examples, make sure that things are there and stable. Then when they purchase, that's when they're interested in the portal, right? They don't care about the portal before they purchase most of the time. They're going to look at the docs a lot heavier. They're going to maybe contact support. They're going to look at the tools. They're a little bit more invested. And then post-purchase, how's the support? Like, how's the uptime? How's your performance, right? Is it reliable? Are there analytics? Things like that. So we can use these as a reference and say, like, start developing this. So developer experience is a thing, for sure. And getting into it, I have a little bit of insight into what's going on in this space, since I've been in this space just for so long, and I'm talking to these companies. Large companies have developer experience teams. It's not anything new to them. I'm surprised that they have the teams without the information being public. That's what's surprising to me, is that there's very little resource like in the public scheme, but these companies have these established teams that are operating internally. Some things about the big companies is that sometimes the UX team is the DX team. And if you do have a DX team, the people are coming from these roles. So they're often transitioning from user experience, product design, product management, or developer relations. I'm one of these people. And all three of these people bring that empathy, but this person brings the technical field, and that's what's important. I think that the hardest part about this field is that you need to have a combination of technical understanding and this like empathetic understanding, or like and research, basically, I don't know what I want to call it, like skill set, I guess. Many people are lacking that, and you also have this like stereotype of engineers especially lacking this empathy, right? So it's really tough to find people who get this at all. And if you're just curious about transitioning into this field, or whatever, this is just where people are coming from, right? They're coming from product roles, user experience, and developer relations. A lot of clients I'm working with are actually API product managers. So they're in charge of the product. They want to know like what's going on with this product and how they can make it better. Small companies just are not there yet. Like, they don't have anything. The APIs are documented by the engineers that build them. And often if you ask them about that, they say the code is the documentation, which is horrible. We have this other problem, small and big companies actually, which is outdated information is left to rot online. So since I showed you that graph, right, from 2008 or whatever it was, there wasn't outdated information then. But now we have it, because the APIs have been around so long, and it's a maturity problem in the space. And so we're starting to see that these companies that have been producing blog posts and producing content and stuff for years, well, now they have all this graveyard of stuff that doesn't work, and they're not going back and maintaining to find out, do developers go to this old blog post and do they get stuck? Are they using outdated stuff? Product feedback comes from users sometimes. I'm sure we know that. But again, these teams are really small. They're sometimes for 3 people, and they're saying, oh, we'll just get the feedback from the developers, right, when we send it up. But developers don't freaking send feedback, because they just switch and go to another API. When I worked at PubNub, I was actually making a little app. And I started building, and I saw that I started implementing, and then as I was implementing, none of these apps worked, none of the APIs worked immediately. So I would just pull one out and put another one in, right? I did that 5 times until I put PubNub in there, and PubNub worked. So I stayed with PubNub, and then I ended up getting a job there, right? And now, etc. So the developer experience matters, but also I didn't send any of those 4 people, these other 4 APIs, information, right? I just swapped them out, because effectively sometimes they're commoditized. Like sometimes it's so easy to swap out, it only takes like 10 minutes or something. All right. Another issue we're seeing in developer experience is a disconnection between marketing, support, product, engineering, and also documentation. So these engineering teams are moving fast, and then that has to ripple through the organization, and the documentation has to be updated, the marketing site has to be updated, the product has to be updated, all the roadmap and all this stuff. So it just creates a huge stress point. Now, I'm sure regular products have this problem as well. I just think the allocation to the team size is a big issue. And what's happening is, maybe each of these departments is doing their own job, but when you look at it holistically, right? If I'm a developer and I enter the marketing site and it says something, and then I use the product and it says something else, I'm gonna lose trust, and I also might be confused. But individually, those things are probably all stable, and the company's not really giving it this holistic view. A lot of times, that's an artifact of how the organization's structured. So is the marketing team talking to the developer, the documentation team, or are they talking to the engineering team, et cetera? So doing this holistic testing, which I'll talk to you about a little bit more, exposes those differences. Like you saw that guy was using all these tools, and that's gonna show you where things drop off. I did a test, and we found that the same credentials, what would you call the API key and the API secret, were referred to as 6 different things. It's like API key, API secret, username, and password, and then public key and private key, all within the same documentation of the same website. Finally, we have this API products are overwhelming. So a lot of teams don't have enough resources to maintain the massive products and support customers. When we look back at that chart that showed the scale, right? Imagine so now we have one API used by 100 implementers, right? 100 apps that are used by 1,000 people each. Well, now those engineers are supporting all those users of those APIs, and they have to answer to them. So they don't have enough time to support those customers and then also improve the API, and then much less care about how good the documentation is, because they're just swamped, right? It's a scaling problem. But the good news is we're starting to see investment in developer experience startups. So again, it's a thing, it's blown up. I got 2 examples here. So these more TechCrunch articles. This is Postman, again, the app that we saw earlier. They raised $50 million. You can't see the date, but it's June 19th, 2019. They're 5 years old. I think it's a Series B for them. They're huge right now. The people are super excited about it. What's crazy is they were just a Chrome extension. They were just like one guy's side project for years. And now it's caught up to where it's like a thing, and so now they're getting $50 million. Another example of that, README.io scores $9 million, Series A. That's August 20th, 2019. So it looks like 2019 is the year for these things to get funded. We have another, there's a couple local places, I can't remember what they're called, a couple local businesses that do developer experience. Stoplight.io, that's what it's called. Anyway, so that's what I'm doing here with my company, Haxor. Basically, testing and measuring developer experience using on-demand feedback from real developers. So it's a lot like usertesting.com. They're basically unmoderated sessions where developers are trying to build with apps. And again, it's UX research for DX. That's where we saw that video earlier. That's where that came from. And formatting, that stuff. But basically the idea is we study developers as they build apps in the API. Developers think aloud as they build, and then they fill out a survey. We get to see how they use all those different tools, right? Oh man. Well, those are the value props, but I'll skip over them. Basically, at the end of it, we get a report that's going to show you, what did people think of those different kind of aspects of the pyramid? What have made them better? Did they reach their goal? Why did you not reach your goal? Errors, things like that. And right now, I'm actually working on a developer experience research product. So these are screenshots of it. It's effectively a program that a participant would download. They would, this is pretty typical if you use Lookback or some other kind of app. They download this program, record their screen, and record their mic, but also it's going to record the open applications. It's also going to track the code they wrote. So over time, you can see, maybe I start my coding, but then I go into Google Chrome for half the test. Then I code Google Chrome, code, do something else. With this format, I can also detect how long did it take until you dropped in, your PubNub SDK or your Visa SDK. When did that happen? It supports transcriptions, stuff like that. We can see what are they saying along the way, maybe how they feel. It gets a little hard to do that. But yeah, I think this is just going to be huge for this space because there's almost no tooling for this. There's barely anyone doing research, and there's fewer tools. So again, these are some of the things it does. It tracks the coding changes, it tracks open applications, records the desktop and webcam, and then transcribes the text. Some of the questions it answers are, what system and environment does the developer use? How much time is spent in each application? How long does it take until the developer starts coding? And how many errors do they encounter? And that's about it. That's developer experience from my perspective. Would love to answer questions you guys have, or like start a discussion, or. Thank you.
Yeah, I have two questions.
Sure.
First, two different questions. First, have you ever done any studies on with the different levels of development skill that people have, like novice versus more expert levels?
The clients are usually interested.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure, yeah. So the question was, have you ever done any experiments that required a certain experience level, like novice or like experience, junior, senior? And I have this good quote, but I think somebody from Stripe told me they wanted someone who was a student to be able to sign up as their target market. So most people are just interested in that someone with enough experience can sign up and complete these tasks. Does that answer your question? It's mostly weighted toward, can someone do this? And the experience level, sometimes the products are so technical that you actually no one would be able to complete it unless you like understood machine learning. That's what I've seen. But I haven't seen someone like Stripe care, like, because if someone's a novice, right, usually the experienced people can handle it. Yeah.
All right. My other, yeah, sure. So I noticed that you also had a lot of metrics, including NPS.
Yeah.
I was really interested. Have you also considered things like SUS assessment, system usability scale?
Totally. Yeah. Yes, definitely. Like, there's a lot of metrics that I'm going to be implementing. These are just some basic ones that we've come up with to see. NP-SAS it's funny. Some people don't care about it at all, and some people think it's awesome for developers. But.
Do you ever consider putting a camera kind of on their desk surface as well? Because there's oftentimes people who use also resources separate from what's online and whatnot, and you want to know what other resources they're taking time for.
Yeah, so that's actually really interesting. There's two parts of that I've seen already, which is one is what about your phone? So if I'm working with Twilio and I get a call, and the next one is books, or how about if I'm developing for the Oculus Rift or something, how the heck are we going to record them? In terms of my business has been focused on, it's mostly self-serve stuff, or like, hey, can you run an iPhone emulator and show us it works, things like that. I'm finding that people are hesitant to even record themselves, so I think it's interesting. Like, if it were, again, Visa has a lab in here, I think that's like a much more appropriate place to be like, whatever, but then you're losing those, like, what if I have a library of books? So it's tough. I think that maybe it'd be interesting. Hey, can you put this webcam behind you? Yeah. Or we'll ship you a webcam. Sure.
Hi. Okay. Maybe I missed it, but you were talking about some companies already have DX teams.
Yeah.
And they're not, the developers aren't really giving them the feedback. So where are they doing?
Oh, sorry. I guess I tried to divide this talk into small companies, the problems they're having, and then big companies. I think that overall, you're not really going to get feedback from developers just in any case. Like, they're not going to just email you and say, I had this bug, unless they're like probably already implemented, or oftentimes people will just switch, because I read this super long article recently that's about, developer flow. You might have heard that like developers like to have 4 hours to like complete any task and blah, blah, blah. They don't want to wait on management. Effectively, like, it's making the argument that if something is obstructing the developer's desire, they're going to try to solve it themselves or move along or like build something. And they're not effectively going to wait for that communication. Does that make sense? So even big companies suffer from this problem, you know? I think it's really tough to get feedback from them.
Okay, so it's not, but I guess what I'm asking is what methodologies are they using to collect that data? The developers are doing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of very interesting things happening. So one common thing is, for example, Apple and Xcode, or whenever you launch Xcode, it says, do you want to submit usage details? Right, so that's a huge one for them, because they can see what errors you're hitting, stuff like that. I am suspicious that Microsoft is pushing VS Code. It's a free IDE. Why is Microsoft pushing this VS Code out, right, to everyone to use for free and supporting it? Well, they could probably get analytics from that if it's not already a part of it. They can see what languages are popular, what are people writing, stuff like that. I mean, probably not what people are writing, but they can get analytics. So there's a lot of automated analytics going on. One package for Node.js, which is a pretty popular language, recently when you install it, it says, again, do you want to submit user feedback? And that's really new for the area because it's actually a part of the package management system, and it's not like a program I'm running on my computer. It's actually like an SDK that's asking for usage details. So that's one way people are doing it, but I think that in order to really get a reliable way, these companies are hiring developers on Upwork, things like that to go through, and they're just doing this every quarter. They're hiring them and asking them to record videos to get the feedback of what it's like to be new. And I haven't seen anything else that's been as reliable as talking to people.
Yeah, I was curious how you're using the data results for solutions, maybe for developers, because you did present a lot of information on how observing their behavior and things like that, people are switching between applications. Are there some kind of brainstorming into how to make the application switching easier, faster, combining them into one larger program, or things of that nature?
There's definitely been consolidation. So for example, again, VS Code has terminal built into it. So there is consolidation, and there's like a lot of plugins happening just in terms of the community. This doesn't have much to do with UX. I wouldn't necessarily say the application switching is a problem. I think the data point is interesting. Like, what do we do with these metrics? You get these scores, and so far what we've been doing is like, since we're using the same scoring mechanism, we can say, hey, your experience sucked compared to this other experience we tested because we're using the same test. But we don't really have, we don't have standards. We don't have global indexes. People are inventing indexes, if you say, okay, it takes me 30 minutes to use this API, is that good or bad? There isn't really anything to relate it to. We do have people coming out and saying developers should be able to use understand your API in 3 seconds, use it in 30 seconds, and implement it in 30 minutes or something like that. I don't know. But we're still figuring out what that means. And some APIs are very different. Some things are really complex, and some things are just one call. So it's almost like an individual measurement, right, per API. And so what we're doing is saying, well, if we use the same test, at least we can show you if you're doing better or worse over time. Yeah.
So earlier you made a kind of offhand remark about the phrase, the code is the documentation,
yeah,
and like how that's horrible. I'm curious, like, if you think that, because in that pyramid you've got like you have the functionality, stability, and then like ease of use and clarity. So it's kind of a two-part question. One, is there a point where if your API is structured in a sort of self-consistent way, that phrase can essentially be true? Like if one request has a similar structure to a different request for a different thing, that like once you get the first couple of them down by reading the docs, like you can kind of intuit what the next one might be as a developer. And where in importance would that be compared to comprehensive documentation and
yeah,
like that?
It's an interesting point. So to sort of rephrase, the question is, the code actually can be good documentation. I program myself, so I often reference the code of projects that don't have documentation. And I believe this, but also understand that people are new. And so people can't go digging. You almost have to, again, like looking at that other chart, I don't know what that meant. But it's basically instructive, right? And so you need this guidance in there. Sorry, I forgot the second part of my question. It was,
I guess like what's the relative importance of like comprehensive documentation versus a self-consistent API?
yeah. I think this, you know, again, it's got to work, and then it's got to be reliable, and then the more up here you get, the better it'll be for the experience. But like, again, you're not going to be, you'll be doing about as good of a job as anybody else if you only do these two things. That's what I would say. Is that the point of this is that there are 20,000 APIs that are doing this, but the companies that are Twilio and Stripe are filling this up. That's what I'm trying to say. So it can certainly work, and plenty of APIs work like this, right? And again, there's a lot of people who are being like, I went to a conference one time and I started pitching, you know, my company to them, and they said, we don't care about this because all of our API implementations are done by partnerships, and they call us, and they have to use our API, right? So we walk them through it. We don't care. So this is actually for a specific case of like self-serve. How can we make people autonomous? How can we scale it out? How can we be the best? I certainly think this is functional, you know, and it doesn't prevent a lot of people, but that question is interesting because in a lot of my sales, I get the same question, and they'll say, well, it works, we have people on it, right? And it's like the difference between useful and delightful, if that makes sense. So certainly people can use it, but if you want it to be great and you have people be happy and refer your friends, things like that. And another interesting thing about that to bring up is code generation. So, or SDK generation. So there's another thing here, I think I showed you, I don't know where that is, but we have like 70 SDKs or whatever in that, dang it, where is that? Blah, 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 there it is. Okay, so some of these are created automatically through services. So basically you write an API one time and then it generates the products. And to answer, people have the same question. They go, we need to make all these different SDKs, so let's just automatically generate the products. But the thing is, you can't automatically generate this like human component of like explanation. So you just get these, man, I wish I could pause it at the right moment of that video. You basically get these like horrible documentation. I can't find it, but it's basically just like, here's everything this API does with no instruction, because it's just like spits out everything. And I've actually been seeing that it's recommended that rather than generate that, it's actually better to make one REST API, if you're familiar with that, make one good REST API and have no SDKs, than have the REST API with a bunch of shitty SDKs. Because REST, everyone can use REST, and once you refer them to something that's bad, you're kind of hurting that relationship a little bit. So I think that's a really good strategy. It's just to start with REST, make that great. Long answer, but anyone else?
Yeah, earlier you had a slide that had different developer experience conceptual framework.
Oh, yeah.
There's a term called conation. I just wanted to know what your definition for that term was.
Let's see, there it is.
Right there, the bottom.
Conation, yeah. How do developers see the value of their contribution? So how does what they're doing, look at the words here, it's like motivation, intention, goals. So the way I understand this graph is how do I feel about what I'm doing and how it matters? And then this side is how do I feel about what I'm doing in like a social or team context. So this is just about the outside world, and this is more about the internal. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I don't know.
It's like your desire to do something.
Yeah, so conation is desire.
It's like your desire to do something, like your volition.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
internal motivation to do something.
So one is motivation, and then one would be understanding, right? Yeah.
So, even now, it's difficult at times to convince business leads of even the value of UX. So what would you say to a business lead who says, well, we already have an established share in the market, we already have tons of partners looking to integrate with us, they're going to be doing that based on that business need, and thus the developers are going to have to learn how to use our stuff because frankly that's their job, you know, and I just can't commit any more resources to this. So what would you say to argue, yes, you really need to do this because this is going to save you money?
It looked like you recited that from memory. Like,
I've talked to it, yeah.
Most of my sales are from people who want to prove that their developer experience sucks to management. They know that it's bad, but they don't have the authority or the ability to convince other people. And so there are people like you distributed between all these companies who go, how the hell is anyone using this thing? So you got to show them that it's bad and what it could be. So if you show them the Twilio and Stripe stuff in the industry and how it's going and how these companies are successful compared to their competitors and why, but it's definitely tough, and it just comes up all the time. You know that it's, again, why would we do this if people can use it? It's their job. There's a book that's called The New Kingmakers, and it's about the rise of developers as decision makers. And there's a lot of research being done now, mostly by like developer marketing companies, about how developers are making that choice. So what you're talking about is kind of a top-down, like, developer, use this thing, it's our partnership. But a lot of modern organizations are allowing, we're not allowing, but developers are just making those choices and saying, hey, look, I made a prototype in 2 days using Twilio. Let's go with this, you know? Then management goes, oh yeah, Twilio's all right, pricing's okay, whatever, let's go. So that, I mean, there is a lot of documentation about that idea. Now, the justification in this, like, metrics and understanding and user experience, this is new, but people are starting to realize that developers drive decisions. And with Twilio, again, like, they had a billboard that just said, ask your developer on SFO, and it was up there for like 2 or 3 years. They rolled on a strategy their entire existence. So they're betting on that. So check out that book, The New Kingmakers.
And does that then really come down to an argument of scale? E.g., like the more developers adopting your APIs because they're finding it a delightful experience, the more of the market share that you're going to get?
The more that your developers find your API delightful, the more market share you get.
Like, is that the main economic argument?
Yeah. So again, the idea is like with that scaled graph, wherever that was, is that there it is. There it is. Yeah, so it's this scale idea where, again, even that title of the book, Kingmakers, right? Where they're deciding, like, if Twilio gets in here, well then that's going to, if Twilio gets in here and they build a million apps with it, right? Then we have all these users using Twilio, and that the scale of the apps is then scaling the API. If you're working one-to-one partnerships, you're not worried about scale, really. You know, if you're developing these each way, so it is a scale argument for sure.
Can you speak a little bit about benchmarking and how you determine the severity of integrated developer experience?
I wouldn't say we have a metric for that. I mean, what I've been, oftentimes after we do these tests, we'll basically go back and say, hey, these are the things that we're using our expertise to determine are important. You know, I would say like 5 out of 5 people not signing up, you know, to put that at the top of the report, but I think that it comes down to how likely is someone to encounter that problem is just an easy way. And then you also have things like, you know, you can weigh it any way you want, how much money is that gonna lose you, things like that. But for now, it's really just been like, honestly, the tests we run, like, the problems are so bad that it's not a matter of like, do we do this bug or do we do that bug? It's like, your whole thing is messed up. and people just have the complete wrong idea, or like everyone's encountering bugs. So,
Real quick, we have time for one last question, and then after that, anyone who wants to see the research lab, meet in the lobby, and we can take you all on a really quick tour. Maybe if there's more questions, if Ian's around, y'all can keep talking
Yeah, I'll be
here.
here.
That's fine. So, one last question. That'd be good.
So I'm a developer that is working with a team that is currently heavily focusing on DX, and we are still very much a small team, and we are struggling with all the challenges that come with that. I'm curious about any advice that you might have for small teams and tackling such a big issue.
the best advice, also super cheap. Every time you release something, get someone who doesn't know anything about the API to use it and watch them. So whether that's like online or it's your friend or something, but the hardest problem about this is that you can never be new twice, right? You can only be new once. So if you are onboarding, once you've done that once, you're just tainted, and you can never get feedback from you again because you know too much and you don't have that new user mindset which you're going after. So no one on your team can be doing the testing, right? Everyone has to come from somewhere else. And it's not, it's not expensive to get these people in to do the testing. I'm sure any UX person here can tell you it's like a few $100 to have them spend an hour or so, or record a video of themselves or something. But get out there and get other people using it, especially when you do updates or you have conceptual differences. Like if you're saying like, oh, we're going from like a functional model to object-oriented or something like that. New SDK. I think that'd be the best advice. And yeah, I definitely like more than hackathons. Like everyone's gonna say, do a hackathon, we'll get some feedback or something. No, just get two people to take a video of themselves, and you'll find a lot of things, a lot of problems. Have you done anything like that?
We've done hackathons.
You've done hackathons, right? But did you just wait for people to report stuff, or did you watch people use it?
We watched.
You watched it, okay.
Yeah.
But you can't do a hackathon every week, right? So it's sort of a repeatable process that you can say, okay, well, it's been 2 months, let's go hire that guy, or hire a new person to go do the test. It'll get you a ton of feedback, yeah. And then, some of the other stuff I said, REST, go REST if you're a small team, don't try to go for the SDKs, just go for a good REST API. Thanks, everybody.
Also, restrooms are down that hallway if y'all need to do that, and then meet in the lobby.
Thank you all for coming.
Anybody's interested in abstract